What's up, guys? So today I want to talk about helmets, particularly helmets and fantasy. So one of the many difficult things to do when writing a fantasy setting is to keep a level of realism that brings about a certain level of immersion without getting rid of that fantasy feeling. So if you want one of the characters to have a set of armor that looks fantasy without being completely ridiculous and is somewhat practical, I suggest starting with the helmet. You can do some pretty crazy designs with different helmets that aren't necessarily practical or even necessary, and they might actually have some detriments to the armor, yet you can still do them because they're not, they don't make the helmet completely inoperable or lacking in any sort of utilitarian function. And you can actually keep them somewhat historical too, by looking at historical helmets. For example, take a look at the Roman centurion helmet, or the Roman Galea, I believe it's pronounced. It's got that crest that sits on top that is somewhat impractical. I mean, it wouldn't add a lot of weight, but it would add weight that is completely unnecessary. It would add extra striking area to the helmet that an opponent could hit with a weapon. Now, I can't actually confirm that these were worn in battle, so they could be just sort of ceremonial attachments to the helmet. I think you could actually remove the crest, but again, I can't confirm, but let's assume they were, at least to some extent. An enemy could swing a strike at you, and normally it would just pass over your head, but now it strikes that and yanks your head backwards, and I mean, if that doesn't right there break your neck or injure you in a way that keeps you from being able to fight back, it does definitely open up your throat area to or expose it to more attacks. Again, it does add some weight. I wouldn't think it'd add a lot, but it would be some weight. But probably the biggest detriment of this helmet, or at least the crest, is the fact that it marks you as important. Now, in the modern U.S. Army, we don't stand at attention or salute officers in the field. And the reason for this is snipers. If I'm an enemy sniper and I'm watching over this fob or something, and I see somebody talking, groups of people talking, going about the various tasks, and suddenly I see one person salute somebody else, I'm like, oh, that person he just saluted is an officer, he's important, I'm shooting him. And while the Romans wouldn't have to worry about snipers, so it's probably not as big of a deal, I still think there'd be archers or other assassins, or simply just, it might give somebody, or give the enemy, a reference point on where to attack. For example, if everybody who's of any importance is wearing some sort of red crest, you can see that from quite a ways away, and know that they're an important person, they're probably in charge. So if, let's say they're marching an army, and I might have my army attack their marching army where I don't see any red crests, so where the leadership's theoretically going to be the weakest because they're farthest from there. Things like that, or again, just simply to target the officers or the centurions and take them out first. So again, not the most practical or effective design, but it existed. And so I think it'd also be intimidating because it'd make them look taller and everything. So there is some sort of use for it. Maybe take that, maybe do like a row of like a studded mohawk or something up top. So that could definitely be something you want to do. Now, the row of studded spikes, if you're going for like your fantasy armor, would be somewhat detrimental because the biggest advantage of a helmet is the glance blows off. So it's not necessarily designed just to hit and stop them, but to knock them off to the side. And those studded spikes would actually hold onto the strike. So if somebody struck you in the head with a hammer, mace, a sword, or anything really, instead of glancing off, it might catch on those spikes and stick, and so the full force of that blow goes into your head. But again, there's another historical helmet who had a similar problem, and it didn't have spikes on it, but that would be the Crusader helm or the Great Helm, and it had a flat top. So from my research and understanding, these weren't actually the first helmets. They went from more like crest-shaped helmets to these flat top, and later went into helmets that had arch tops again because they must have realized the problem with it. But it must not have been too detrimental because it kept the flat top for a while. Now the problem with the flat top is, again, glancing blows. it doesn't glance them off as well. If you've got a helmet with a bit of a point to it, or just a rounded surface, and something strikes it, it's going to want to go around that curved edge. However, when you've got a flat top and a strike hits it, it's not going to glance, it's probably just going to continue going down. So if you get hit on top of the head with a hammer, it's not going to glance off. All of that force is going to continue into the helmet. And while the helmet might hold out, your neck might not. If somebody were to hit you on the side or the top and throw your neck or your head off to the side and injure your neck, they could take you out of the fight. So, again, kind of fantasy with the stud mohawks, and somewhat impractical because of the lack of an ability to cause glancing blows, but not completely out of the realm of historical accuracy, because they did use helmets that had a similar problem. Another example of historical helmet that looks somewhat fantasy and maybe not the most practical would be the classic Viking helmet with the sort of spectacles. Now, I believe I found what the technical name for this is called, but I couldn't pronounce it, so I'm not even going to try. The spectacle on the helmet certainly looks intimidating because it covers up part of the wearer's face. However, I'm not sure how useful it would actually be at deflecting anything. I suppose it does cover up a little bit more, covers up your nose and stuff a little bit, but any potential thrust from spears or swords that might have been like a relative miss, for example, that might have hit in the nose or something, it's not going to be directed right to the eye. However, these were worn, so I can assume that they probably found the benefits of it outweigh the risks. And I can understand that. I mean, whether the spear thrust goes into your eye or your nose, you're pretty much out of the fight either way. So, I can see that. However, it does, from some research I've done, it does limit your vision down, because this guard here gets in the way. So like a little bit in front of you and down, you can't see, you kind of tilt your head more. So limited vision is certainly a factor, and that was a pretty common thing for helmets, especially ones with narrow eye slits, simply because you can't see, but it offered great protection. So again, somewhat fantasy looking design that was historical. I particularly like the look of this helmet quite a bit. So maybe it's something you could incorporate in your own fantasy designs. To me, a helmet on a set of armor is like the rims on a car. It can make or break it. So I think starting with the helmet for a fantasy armor design is probably one of your best bets. I think you have a little bit more artistic freedom without varying too much from historical accuracy or from practicality, because you do, again, quite a bit. You can add the spikes and it's not really going to hurt anything. You start adding spikes to your shoulders and you limit the ability to turn your head or potentially even injure yourself. Things like that. So I think you can do that in a helmet and it's not going to hurt too much. Again, it might affect glancing blows, but as we've seen with the great helm, it's not something that's completely inaccurate. You can also do something with some sort of visor or spectacle that looks really cool, even if it doesn't really seem to have much of a purpose, like the Viking helmet I showed you. And even maybe do some other things. Maybe do some cheat cards that are rather pretty neat, like the Roman Gallia. You could do that, but maybe shape them so they look neat. Depending on your characters or what their affiliations and stuff are, maybe you could do something that looks more like sort of like wings of a bat or something. If it would look really cool, you can do it. And again, as long as it's not too impractical, I think you have the most artistic freedom with helmets. So if you're designing a fantasy armor, I think it's something where you could really start there, and I think that's what most people are going to picture if you're writing a book. I think their face is what's mostly going to be imagined by the reader. And if you're doing a video game or a movie, I think that's where the majority of the shots are going to be focused are on the character's face. So I think the helmet's probably one of the biggest ones, and probably even one of the easiest, and really can pull a rather normal looking set of armor into the fantasy realm. So this is my opinion on making fantasy helmets. Thank you for watching.